got no choice, right? You're not going to get a 20% a year pay rise working your job. You're just not. So you think, okay, well, I'm going to invest in this, or I'm going to buy this, I'm going to try this crazy business idea, or a mate's doing this thing down the pub, I'll put some money into it. And hopefully you're always looking for a return which is higher than the inflation. Now, of course, with Bitcoin, it kind of does that for you over time. All you have to do is resist the temptation to switch it back to fear. We have a much bigger problem with energy distribution, because this energy is produced at the wrong time in the wrong place most of the time. You know, in some ways it's chill out, guys, because this was going to happen. At the point the asset is recognized for the value it has, it's going to happen.
Hi, Jason. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
All great, Robin. It's really good to see you again. Back after a year, I think it is.
Yeah, it's been already a year, and it's quite fascinating how much happened in just 1 year. It's like it's 12 months, and it almost feels like the development of Bitcoin, like 3 years is in that 12 months in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can imagine. I mean, where were we? We had it was exactly a year ago, I think. So ETFs had just been approved. I mean, Trump was nowhere near the White House at the time. And we've had, what else? We've had the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve talked about. We've had governments changing their stance, or central banks thinking about buying Bitcoin. I mean, how did that happen in just 12 months? And yet here we are. Halving, yeah. And of course, then Bitcoin touching 109, I think it peaked at. I mean, it's crazy talk. You know, if we'd said that to us a year ago, we would have said, I'm not sure that's going to happen. And yet we're here.
It's super interesting. If you actually talk, exactly 1 year ago, let's say February, March last year, and we talk, okay, the president will probably be at Bitcoin conferences. They will have a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the USA at the halving. I mean, that's it's kind of predictable. We will reach over 100K, and on all those things that have happened, is just kind of amazing. How was that year for you, and what was kind of your highlight in that 1 year?
Well, it's a lot. Been very, very busy. I think this time last year we were talking a bit about mining in the UK. We have been progressing that, and actually we'll talk about that, I'm sure, a bit later on. But the last few months also I've been working with Bitcoin Prague. And I know you're speaking there, Robin, this year, so that's going to be fabulous listening to you at the event, along with some other very big names. So you're going to be in a great company. But I've been working with those guys for a few months, just helping out with some of their content. As you may know, I'm a prolific writer, so I do like to write a lot. And particularly if I can write about Bitcoin, then I'm going to be writing about it. So very pleased to spend a little bit of time working with those guys, Mattis and Martin. I mean, they know their stuff. You know, it's such a pleasure working with them. It really is, and so it's been great.
Really cool. What are you working with the guys from Bitcoin Prague? Obviously, like I really enjoyed the conference. I think this episode will already be actually sponsored also from those guys. But it's actually my first big Bitcoin conference that I went. That's why it's also. I mean, I think I told that story once on the podcast. It's that conference that actually gave me the energy and that encouragement to go deeper into the Bitcoin realm. I was already on Twitter a little bit active, connected with a few people, had like 5,000 followers or something like that on Twitter, but I didn't have a podcast, didn't have any really connections. And being at that conference made me realize I not only want to spend my money in Bitcoin, but I also want to spend my time in Bitcoin. So it has some special place in my heart, Bitcoin Prague, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, what an endorsement. And that's exactly the point of it, really. It is a Bitcoin-only conference. It is perfectly designed for anyone of all levels. And of course, we've got this extra business day on the first day, which, we're really looking for executives, decision makers who've kind of heard of Bitcoin, still not quite sure how it works within their company. So we're focusing a lot of effort on that this year on the first day of the conference. So people who are in that position, or even our Bitcoiners in their company, they may have had conversations with some of their colleagues, and they've looked at them kind of weirdly, which, we're fairly familiar with even now today. But they don't quite know how to progress talking to management, senior executives. So we've put these things together to help that process along this year. So that's something I'm pretty excited about. I've also been, as I say, as a writer, I've been sort of producing some material. We actually wrote a book and just released it just a few weeks ago called From Defenestrations to Bitcoin, 600-Year Fight for Freedom. And it was fascinating because researching this book, I didn't know a lot of this. I mean, I knew that, Bit39 came from Czech Republic, so the first ATMs, the first hardware wallet, the first mining pool, they all came out of Prague and Czech Republic. Now, that bit I knew. The bit I didn't know was all the history leading up to it, which kind of gives you the context as to why Prague and Czech Republic ended up being this kind of really forward-thinking environment for decentralization, self-sovereignty, because it's kind of in their DNA. They've had to fight for this for 600 years through religion and oppression and communism. And so when you go through that, I was as fascinated researching it as I was, ended up writing it with my colleagues. And I would really recommend it. It's a free book, actually, which we've just released for anyone to download and read it. And I really strongly suggest you do, because it's fascinating stuff. And also it's beautifully laid out. I have to say my colleagues did a brilliant job. It looks gorgeous.
Really cool. Yeah, they also had, isn't the central bank of Czech Republic currently investigating if they should put a Bitcoin on the balance sheet?
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, it's early days, but there is talk about it, and they are examining it. And of course, we just had the 3-year capital gains law, so things are changing in the country fast, and we could see Prague and Czech Republic become sort of some leaders in this field, very much so in the international arena. So I'd be excited to see that. Very different from the UK, where I am, of course, where we're very busy going the other way, but hopefully they'll pay attention.
Absolutely. And just a quick note, because you mentioned the industry day, I think that's a day, it's kind of underrated for me, because a lot of people say, like, I don't want to do anything in business. I mean, if you want to do something with business, like the industry day is almost an obligation if you go there. But even for people outside of that, it's a really interesting day because it's a little bit calmer, and people are more accessible. Like on the other days, there's a lot going on. There's like a lot of people also there. So if you want to be a little bit of a calm and a relaxed setting, I think the industry day is an interesting choice. Like I was always like, I don't know if I want the industry day. And then they gave me a media pass, so I got the industry day also, and I was there and I was like, I actually prefer that day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would think the same way and then find exactly the same, because it is kind of a restricted access day. There are fewer tickets on that day, far fewer tickets actually. And that's deliberate, because obviously this is a more specific audience. It does give everyone who goes a lot more time to go around the expo, so you get to meet everyone, have a proper conversation with them. And of course, it's brilliant for networking, because exactly who's there. And this year, there's this fantastic networking app you can use to interact with anyone. So it's, I really recommend it if you can get to that day. So it costs a little bit more, but honestly, it's one of those where it's, it's absolutely worth going.
And I also like that they have a 5%, like it's if you use code Robin, as people here in the advertisement in the middle of the podcast, you can get 10% off. But more importantly, the thing is, you get 5% off if you pay in Bitcoin. And I like
that's
that
additional,
idea.
by the way. Yeah, that's additional.
And that's additional. Yeah. I like the idea of, I don't know how you want to frame it, but for example, Ben of BTC Sessions frames it as like he charges a premium for fiat.
I like that.
Bitcoin Prague is giving a discount for Bitcoin, like however you want to frame it. And I like the idea.
Way better.
I was talking to Ben and he said like, if someone wants to partner up with me, yes, I take dollars, but I charge a 15% premium for that. It's like, yeah, you can give me dollars, but I don't want to touch that, so I charge more for that.
Yeah, I think that's the way we should think of it, and probably increasingly so as the years go by. But yeah, Prague as usual are there first.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe on the topic of central banks buying Bitcoin, I think last time we actually talked about El Salvador quite a bit also, and now for some reason already America is talking about that, which completely blew my mind and is very surprising for me. How do you look at the game theory aspect currently of nation states interacting with Bitcoin, being on a central bank level, being on a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or just like talking about it? And there's like the EU, there's the UK that might not be as friendly as maybe now America is doing it. How do you look at the whole situation currently?
Well, I think we can leave the UK out of it completely for the moment. Yeah, look, I mean, the word people have asked me this question before, and the answer I've used is inevitable. I do think it's inevitable that Bitcoin will be part of reserves, whether it's alongside gold or in place of gold. I mean, that's a whole separate debate. But I have noticed there's been quite a lot of controversy about this, particularly from sort of libertarian style Bitcoiners saying, well, it used to be about freedom and sovereignty, and now we're talking about banks and governments using it as a balance sheet item. And I've talked about this quite a few times, but I do feel it's kind of irrelevant. Just because a bank's got gold, it doesn't mean you wouldn't own gold. It is a commodity. They cannot print it. They can't create it. They've either got to earn it or mine it or buy it. I mean, those are your only options, the same as everyone else. So I really don't buy into these arguments that this has a negative effect overall. You could argue that it makes it difficult for the ordinary person to acquire some at a lower price, but really that's about it. It doesn't stop you using it, or doesn't stop you protecting your wealth. So that's the only area I would slightly disagree on with a lot of people. But I do think, in some ways it's chill out, guys, because this was going to happen. And it was at the point the asset is recognized for the value it has, it's going to happen. And we are just right at the beginning of that process now.
Yeah, and it's the point of like Bitcoin is for everybody and permissionless. So like, who said that? I think Jeff Booth was it that said, what's the worst thing about Bitcoin? And the worst thing about Bitcoin is that even your worst enemy can have Bitcoin. Like that's the only bad thing about Bitcoin. So if you
It's beautiful. I mean, that's exactly the point. I tweeted something the other day that someone used Bitcoin in some context, and I hated the fact that they'd used Bitcoin in this particular context. But it's just like, well, tough. I mean, the day you can start saying what you can and can't use Bitcoin for, it loses its value. That's the whole point of it. So, those applications are changing all the time and improving all the time. And some of them we may not agree with, but that's the beauty of the fundamental asset itself.
Absolutely, but I do get the frustration sometimes because I am a big proponent of individuals and families and those who actually need it get it. But if you look at the facts, like retail sometimes sells at weird times, and companies just buy, institutions just buy, and they seem to be sometimes smarter around how to acquire it. They're not selling, they're just buying, they're holding it. And yes, there are like a big cohort of Bitcoin hodlers that just like buy every month a little bit and increase the stack exactly how
I've
they
seen
should
those
do it.
guys. Yeah.
That's amazing. But there are a lot of people, and I see it all in my comments, like, oh no, I sold Bitcoin today for that altcoin to get a little bit more Bitcoin later, and they're trying to be really fancy with that asset. And I'm like, no, like that's where retail has no money and the institutions has money, because they just buy and hold it and they get it. And it's kind of frustrating, but that's not a Bitcoin mistake. That's just a human.
That's a human error. Mistake. Yeah, I mean, the distribution of Bitcoin is, you could argue it's a kind of equitable distribution, but it's not necessarily a sort of a fair distribution, because you could say, well, the early people we've got thousands of them. I mean, that's impossible now unless you're a nation or an institution, and even owning just a handful of them in a few years' time will be very, very difficult unless you're a nation or an institution. So you can say, well, that's a bit unfair, but you're still thinking in terms of kind of fiat returns, I think. It doesn't matter what price Bitcoin is. If you're using Bitcoin, you're still protecting fundamentally your wealth from devaluing over time through inflation once you make that transition over to that asset. And I think that's the key point. We all have this kind of fiat mindset. I can make more money by buying at this time and selling at this time. It's hard to get out of. It's really difficult because you kind of programmed that way. But I always think, look at the broader view of how that asset can be used regardless of price and regardless of how many is owned by a central government somewhere.
It's interesting. Do you think that, with fiat, we have always this effect of like, if you have more fiat, it's easier to get more fiat. And with Bitcoin, it's kind of harder to do that. Obviously, if you have more Bitcoin, it's also like you have an advantage there, but it's not as ingrained as in the fiat system. Do you think because of the proof of work system, Bitcoin over the long run will just be the best distributed asset along this unfair thing that we have in the fiat system, maybe because you can only acquire it with proof of work, or like, I don't know, you spend energy or your labor in it, I think the days where we can actually buy Bitcoin with other money might be numbered. How do you think the distribution will be over the long run with Bitcoin?
Well, there's a lot in that question, actually. So, I mean, in terms of distribution, I think so. Would it be fairer? I don't know how that would play out. I think the point is Bitcoin will always be available somewhere. So it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if it's years from now. If you want to make the move to Bitcoin, you can do that from moving from your fiat to Bitcoin. And then once you're in that fiat in that Bitcoin environment, then it becomes kind of irrelevant what fiat is doing from that point. But we might be talking about fractions. And I've written articles on this that we're going to be talking about Satoshis in years to come. We're not going to be talking about Bitcoin. That would be irrelevant for most people on a day-to-day basis. That would be things that companies have on their balance sheet. It won't be things that we use. And the other point that you made, I think, was this getting sort of a return, I suppose, on your Bitcoin, or always trying to acquire more like you do with fiat. Well, don't forget, we do that with fiat because we have to. We have to invest because we know the money we're using is devaluing so fast. So everyone becomes an investor. I think Jack Mallers talks about this quite a lot. You've got no choice, right? You're not going to get a 20% a year pay rise working your job. You're just not. So you think, okay, well, I'm going to invest in this, or I'm going to buy this, I'm going to try this crazy business idea, or a mate's doing this thing down the pub, I'll put some money into it. And hopefully you're always looking for a return which is higher than the inflation rate. You may not know that's consciously what you're doing, but you're always looking for a return that's higher than the inflation rate. So you can at least maintain your standard of living. Now, of course, with Bitcoin, it kind of does that for you over time. All you have to do is resist the temptation to switch it back to fiat, which most of us fail at some point, to lock in that kind of future security. And that's where I believe your self-sovereignty comes in, that independence away from that fiat system that otherwise we are so dependent on. So I hope that makes sense from that point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. It's also the discipline. Hope gets better with people. I noticed it myself that with Bitcoin, I just don't want to spend it. And now it's actually getting harder because my income gets more and more into Bitcoin. So I have to spend my Bitcoin, not sell, but like actually like give it to someone else and buy things with it, just because you have to survive somehow. And so
you do. And actually, you make an important differentiator there between to sell and spend. I mean, you're right. You're essentially exchanging your Bitcoin for fiat when you do that. And I'm kind of loosely lumping those two things together. But broadly, it's about not you think, oh, it's gone up 30%, I'll go back to fiat. Well, you're immediately back in a losing situation again. So then you've got to try and make up that gap over time. So but it's still sort of moving from one asset to another.
And it's also and people sometimes don't get that. It's like thinking in satoshis and thinking of like your net worth in satoshis and just trying to increase that number a little bit each month is the real kind of goal that you can do with that. Even if you spend it of like, okay, like I'm going to a Bitcoin meetup, I want to buy like a burger with Bitcoin. You can do that. But the important part is not that you gave away an asset, but the important part is that your stack increases each month and you're not selling it for like fiat, or you're trying to be fancy with altcoins, or maybe buy some other stock with that. And I think that's where hopefully Bitcoin gets us back to. We are only buying things that are really valuable for us, and we really value those things, and we can then live better with Bitcoin. I hope so, at least.
Yeah, and it never gets old paying with Lightning. It doesn't. I mean, it's just the buzz of handing the phone over and seeing those two green ticks like pretty much instantly. I mean, it's been years. I still never gets old for me.
Absolutely. You brought us some interesting news around Bitcoin mining and UK. You said I'm really interested. I think the last time we talked about UK and Bitcoin mining was like at least a month or like 2 months ago. I forgot his name. I will search it when you talk to, because he was really good on the topic also. What's going on in the UK with Bitcoin mining?
But the short answer is nothing. I mean, look, there are sites you can go to where you can track sort of global hash rates by country. I mean, you've got to be slightly careful because we do know that some of these IP addresses which originate have been used, sent by VPNs to those locations. So don't expect 100% accuracy. And of course, people who are mining, solo mining, might not necessarily be in there. So that said, you can see these big numbers from America and China, where of course it's banned. But it's not really. And then in the UK, I think our latest number was 0.25% of global hash rate. So 0.25%. And we suspect that a lot of that actually is from VPNs. So we don't even think it's 0.25%. It just hasn't happened here. And the reason for that is all to do with power price and the traditional way of thinking of mining. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'll just explain some of the key differences here, which might shock you slightly. But so let's take somewhere like the US. Okay, let's take Texas, right? A lot of mining in Texas, and they use something called nodal pricing. Their system. So what that means is you might have a local power producer who finds a way through a combination of renewable energy or gas flaring or something like that to produce, not gas flaring, gas recycling, to produce power very, very cheaply. And then they say, right, I'm going to sell this power at 2, 3, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you're a miner, you can say, great, what I'll do is I'll roll in and I'll set up an operation here. Here's what we call a power purchase agreement, a PPA. We will buy that power at this price and you'll produce it, get paid, and we'll produce our Bitcoin and we'll generate our revenues that way. So that's kind of traditional mining, if you like, and how lots of countries work on this basis in some form or another. Now, let's have a look at the UK. What have we decided to do in the UK? What we've decided to do is completely ignore any kind of nodal pricing or zonal pricing. And we have a single price for the entire country, right? And coincidentally, we also have highest electricity prices in the world. So I don't know if those two things are linked, but you draw your own conclusions. And we also have a rather bizarre system because we do have quite a lot of renewable energy in the UK. I mean, we don't actually so much have a problem with energy production. We have a much bigger problem with energy distribution. because this energy is produced at the wrong time in the wrong place most of the time. So, and it's quite hard to transport it around. We don't have a lot of the infrastructure for that. So you think, oh, that's great because you've got all this excess energy. We could use that, right, for Bitcoin mining because it can't get to where it is. Well, yes, but then you come back to this pricing issue, right? So we have this strange thing called marginal pricing in the UK, and grids are difficult to balance. So you've constantly got to balance power in power out. I mean, it's a hell of a job. I wouldn't like to try and do it, but obviously this is what these guys do. So it has to stay at a certain level, very tight range of power in to power out. So you can imagine everyone turning all their appliances on and off and the power going up and down from all these different sources, particularly renewable. It gets very difficult. And what the National Grid do is every 30 minutes, essentially, they sort of say, right, this is the power expectation, and you can bid in to provide that power. And of course, all these people, there's a mechanism for this. There's a big market for it. It's fast and automated, semi-automated. And these people bid in to provide that power. And that sounds great because obviously you've got some cheaper power units in there. And you think, well, that's great. You just sell it to the lowest bidder, right? I mean, that just makes sense. That's the cheapest power. But they may get the agreement, they may get that contract for the 30 minutes, or the ability to provide that power for 30 minutes. But it's actually paid at the price that the last unit of electricity was produced at from the highest producing plant, so the most expensive plant, which sounds odd, right? So that plant is almost always gas because that's our backup. And I think a guy called Dr. Andrew Crossland, you probably should look up his lecture, actually, it's quite interesting, did a great analogy of this, because I don't think I've done a great job of explaining that, actually. But think of it this way. Let's say you go to the supermarket and you buy a sandwich for £1, and you buy a drink for £3, and, you buy yourself a nice expensive bottle of wine for £25, right? So your bill comes to £29. Now, under the UK electricity system, your bill would come to £75 because you pay the highest item over the other two items, right? That's how it works. And that's why we end up with this kind of crazy single pricing system. And there are reasons for it. Don't get me wrong. There was thinking behind it. But the point is, it doesn't end up going to the consumer at the end of the day. And we're stuck in this kind of strange kind of Twilight Zone pricing system when you look at it objectively. You still with me so far on this, Robin?
It's basically a free market interruption, which makes the energy prices way higher than they should be, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I have simplified it a bit because there are special agreements that some of the renewable energy operators have. So it is in some ways a simplification, but the net effect is you end up with this higher price. And the thinking behind it was, well, look, if we pay these guys more, they'll create more cheaper renewable energy, right? So there was some logic behind this happening, but the net effect, to say at the other end, is the consumer doesn't get that discounted price. There is pressure in the UK to change this. There is some awareness about this now. I think Boris Johnson was famously quoted as saying it was madness or something like that. So I put a commission to look at it. So, but this sort of thing takes years to change, and it will take years to change. And that's part of the problem for mining. There are other ones, but that's a key one.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block block in there. And of course, also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. Is it in general from the UK, I currently don't hear anything positive. So I don't actively research because it's not a country that I'm looking to go there anytime soon. But I hear that they get people in prison when they tweet about things. I don't know how much truth there is. Also, I hear that Bitcoiners are trying to move away from there. So anytime UK comes up in a Bitcoiner freedom context, I only hear bad news.
Yeah, we're not synonymous with Bitcoin freedom, and that's a whole different conversation about tweets and other stuff that's going on here. We've created a lot of problems for ourselves over the last, particularly the last decade. And it's accelerated since COVID. I mean, a lot of countries have had problems since then. We seem to excel at them at the moment, and it's quite depressing actually just to see what's going on. But don't get me started on that because we will be here all day.
I get that, yeah. But you're not looking at you're currently in the UK living, and you're not looking at moving out of the UK.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, if you asked me even probably a couple of years ago, I would say no. Because my home country, I've travelled fairly extensively. My wife actually lived in Canada for 5 years, and I've been abroad for extended periods. And I do love travelling, visiting other countries, but I always had this thing I wanted to be back in England. That's my country, proud British, etc., etc. And it's only in the last sort of 6 months to a year where I've really started to genuinely question that and think about, okay, well, which countries we'd like to live in, and there is a short list of countries that we'd like to live in. But where it was an impossibility, it's now become a possibility. Not a high possibility, but it's something now that is on the radar that was never there before. And that is a direct result of some of the issues I've been seeing here in the UK.
How is it with Bitcoin currently in the UK? I know, I think two people were on my podcast talking about the UK Bitcoin policy, that group. how good is it in the UK with Bitcoin?
Well, you used the word good, so there's your first problem, right? We have a government who are actively ignoring it currently. I mean, actively ignoring it. Now, to be fair, the last government did as well. So this is nothing new. The guys you're talking about, Bitcoin Policy UK, I mean, that's Freddie New. I know you've had Freddie on your show, and he's a fantastic guy, really knows his stuff over here. And of course, Susie Violet Ward as well. They run BP UK. And they've got quite a big task ahead of them. And they're all effectively volunteering as a kind of, I suppose, not-for-profit organisation, I guess is the best way to describe it. But they're really there to educate, to try and put some pressure, maybe the wrong word, but sort of keep whispering in the politicians' ears to have a look at this, have a look at that, because here's the reasons, here's some research to support it. Obviously, I spend a lot of my time tweeting and tagging Rachel Reeves, our chancellor, when things come up. I know there's people like Ashley Giles on Twitter. I think who sends a tweet to Miliband every day. That's our energy guy, just saying, hey, look at the Bitcoin you could have mined with all this excess energy that we're wasting. So we are poking it, and particularly BP UK spend a lot of time poking this. But at the moment, the message is very much, look, talk to the hand. we're not even going to engage in this conversation currently. But that doesn't mean we should stop. We need to carry on those conversations.
Amazing, and they're great people. I just because we mentioned so many already, I will just quickly show that. The first one that I talked about, where I couldn't remember the name, was Nick actually.
Nick, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about Bitcoin mining, but also like the Bitcoin overall thesis, and he has a great thing with like the stabilizing. Freddie was on. That was also amazing talking with him. And actually, you mentioned Susie; she was actually also on the show, and I think those are amazing people. So I keep meeting really, really cool people from the UK and from like starting from like Adam Back to like everyone that is known also in the Bitcoin sphere that is from the UK. They're really great people. And do you think something like, because USA was also kind of hostile in some regards before Trump, with like the open source people and trying to imprison them and stuff like that. Do you think that a similar change that is now in the USA is possible also in the UK?
It's possible. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think it will require a change of government or personnel or just a change in thinking. But, it's possible that the USA looking at strategic Bitcoin reserve has at least turned some heads, if nothing else. But, Trump in some ways is not the best advocate. I don't know if you watched him signing the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, but he followed up, didn't he, with that? It looked very half-hearted. He didn't really understand what he was signing. And then he made that comment, never sell your Bitcoin. So they say, who the hell knows? I mean, it's hardly an endorsement of where we are. And I do think that didn't help. He kind of missed an opportunity there because he simply doesn't really understand it yet. But other people around him do. I mean, Senator Loomis, obviously, she understands what's going on. She's putting her bill forward. Michael Saylor clearly, hopefully, has the ear of some of these guys and can have an impact. But those sort of things, they're great, but they're still at a very early stage because there's a whole load of stuff we've got to go through. I mean, we might even see the US do more shitcoining first before they, the traditional route that we all follow, right? Before they really get into the Bitcoin side. Arguably, they've done some of this, but it's there's a lot there's a lot to happen before there's real clarity there. Oh, I should mention Dennis Porter as well, of course, with the work he's doing, because that man is relentless. He just will not stop until this happens. So I think once one of those converts, maybe we'll see some action elsewhere. I still don't think it'll be from the UK. I think it'll be another country, and then that might be enough to urge the UK to at least have a look at this.
Yeah, and I think the biggest positive thing that I get away from Trump is now that he acknowledges that he has to be for it and not against it, because there's an important voting bloc behind it. I think that's the extent. I mean, I have no clue, but I think that's the extent that he understands it, of like, okay, I benefit more from being for it versus being against it, because there's like a very important voting bloc that also coincides with my general voting bloc of the Republicans and Freedom Movement. And I do agree, it was really funny, the video where he signed it and where he was asking like, and you think that is a good idea?
It was so bizarre. It was like, is this a good idea? So I just thought, yeah, why not? I'll just do it. I mean, it's not really, I don't think how executive orders are supposed to be signed. But anyway, let's maybe get back to the UK, because there's there are some things happening here, I think, which are interesting.
Really, it's super. I just want to mention that it's super funny with Trump. I saw that and I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's positive.
I think a few of us have definitely had that same reaction. I think that's part of the reason why markets reacted as they did, because people were like, it's good, right? There was no certainty there, really.
And at the dinner later, I think this was like a day later or 2 days later, where Saylor was at the dinner, and I was so disappointed. I watched it live. It was like 10, 11 p.m. in the Austrian time zone, and I watched and I was so disappointed that Saylor did not speak. And he actually right at the end, he said like, "Oh yeah, I want to speak," and then he gave the word to someone else, and then Trump just ended the thing. And I was like, come on, I
actually missed that part. Oh wow. Oh dear, oh dear.
Yeah, but it's but let's come back to the UK. You said there are some interesting things.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of took a bit of a detour there, but we're talking about the energy side and the why we can't mine in the UK, or on the face of it, you can't mine, and that's the traditional thinking. And there have been a couple of companies that have tried to mine in the UK, and they've looked for stranded energy, wasted energy to do it, because the numbers are staggering. Actually, we spend about £1 billion a year, in energy. Now, what that means is, there's 2 wind farms in particular in the UK very guilty of this, and massive wind farms, and they are curtailed around 60% of the time. Now that means they only produce energy 40% of the time, but they're paid for the whole lot as if they were producing. So that's when you see a wind turbine, it's not turning, you're thinking, it's a windy day. Why is that not turning? It's either under repair, or more likely it's been curtailed. So they either stop it in low winds or turn the blades to a very specific angle into the wind, so it turns extremely slowly, doesn't produce very much power. But they're still paid as if the power is being produced, because that's the terms of the contract. And then someone's got to pay for that, and that goes on our electricity bills. And so all that money then we pay, us as end consumers, businesses and individuals pay for that curtailment. So we have this strange mismatch, right? So we've got this really high energy power and about £1 billion worth of power we're wasting a year. And that's projected by the way to increase. And actually some prices in some areas will go negative because we're overproducing so much power, just paying people to take it away effectively. So how do you match all of those things up, particularly on a big scale, and particularly if you're still thinking of a kind of traditional model, this kind of PPA, power purchase agreement model? It doesn't really work. So when we started Renewablox, it was actually my colleague Callum Wheeler who started. I came along slightly later. We went down the traditional route of looking at, we find this energy, we sign an agreement, we mine that way. And we did what the other companies did. We spent a lot of time going around and realised actually this is quite difficult. Even when you're speaking to power operators directly, they can generally sell power at a higher rate to the grid through things called feed-in tariffs. So that's tricky to do. It's not really going to work. So we went back to the drawing board. We really did take the long way around on this. Went back to the drawing board and said, right, how can we think about this differently? UK obviously needs a different approach. So we came up with the idea of turning mining on its head. So what if mining is not the primary output? What if the primary output is heat, for example? Remember, all power that goes into miners is basically converted to heat. What if we were to use the asset as a market asset? So we can use that asset in what's called the ancillary services market. So we can use it specifically to balance grid, take excess loads, respond to frequency modulations. There are other types of markets, actually, I can't remember what they're off the top of my head. But then we turn it into a different way of doing it. Your byproduct is your Bitcoin mining. Okay, so it's now the other way around. So primarily our job is to balance the grid. So the asset is designed specifically for that purpose, which allows us to take part in these ancillary markets. And Bitcoin mining is kind of the side effect of doing that. What would that look like? So we thought, well, that sounds cool. Let's check it out. And then we discovered just how complex the energy markets are. Then we just discovered how closed they are. And it's one of those things, if you knew how difficult it was, you would never start, but we ended up in that position. So once we flipped it on its head and we thought, right, well, that's the angle we'll use now. So it means a whole different set of questions now you can deal with energy operators and energy consumers as well. Now we have a different way of a different conversation to have. And that then led to, suddenly we had doors open all over the place. So now we've got multiple projects in the UK, which are either early stages of exploration or quite long down the road into getting quite close to actually possible deployment. And in fact, we're taking a trip up to Scotland, I think it's next week or the week after. We've got several sites, I think 3 or 4 sites that we're going to scout in one trip. And so once we've made that change, we now realize it's possible. It's very difficult and it's taken us a long time. We've had to build a lot of partnerships to do it, but we now know it can be done.
Interesting. And it's the grid stabilizing aspect of mining seems to be a no-brainer, even if you hate Bitcoin.
And you've brilliant point, Robin. You kind of hit the nail on the head in some ways. I mean, we learned this. We would go to an energy operator and say, "Hey, you can sell us the pound, you can do Bitcoin mining," and they'd either look at you like, "What?" or "I don't want to get involved with that," because these guys have no idea about Bitcoin, right? Most people still don't. So then you have to have this whole discussion, and of course you can't do it quickly. It takes us all quite a while to really get our heads around this. So we thought, okay, well, let's forget all that. We'll say, right, we will be there. We will provide the service. We can maybe, on your site using part of your connection with your import tariff, we could pay you a rent. We can and then trade on the ancillary markets with that asset. But we'll be mining as well, but that's kind of in the background. We're a data center. We don't need to worry about any of that. So that's a much easier conversation to have because you're now just talking about a business model that they understand.
Yeah, it's. I talked with a few people already around that, and I think putting Bitcoin mining as as much in the background as possible, and just the technology advancement for that. Of hey, we can balance the grid and it's just like a container and you just plug it in and you don't even have to worry what's in the container. You just if you have over excess energy, just put it in there. If you don't it can run whenever it can run. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I even talked with some Austrian people. They do it also with the government here. They have the boxes up and running, and for 30 or 60 minutes a day, they run the Bitcoin miners, and the rest of the day it's just standstill. It's just there for when the grid needs it. And if it's not running, it's not running. It's not a problem. And I think that's the huge advantage of being able to just turn it on and off again, and you can really monetize it effectively, which works way better, I think, than with AI or other data centers, because
you can't do it with those. You can't. But part of it's latency, because they can't locate in very rural areas, and you just can't shut down these operations. They needed an enormous backup. So, I mean, the closest analogy is battery, because the batteries can take that power, but they can only take so much power, and they have to discharge at a certain point. So that doesn't always work where you've got a lot of excess energy because you've got no chance to discharge it back to the grid. So that solves that problem as well. That's kind of why Scotland's particularly interesting, because there is a unique situation up there with along those lines.
Interesting. Yeah. The so AI and other data centers is not even possible. So I've always thought it's way better with Bitcoin, but I wasn't.
You can only do it with Bitcoin. There is no other industry. I mean, I challenge you, Robbie. Can you think of an industry that's location agnostic, has that flexibility and load that you can turn on and off, and it's not essential to what it's actually doing?
No, actually not. Yeah,
No,
because you with AI data centers and other things, you need the you cannot just turn it off. You need backups. You need the latency. It makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that actually. I always thought like Bitcoin is way superior, but I never thought that's so much superior that it's actually the only thing.
Yeah, I mean that's why our tagline is RenewableX, flexible Bitcoin mining, because once you sort of step back and look at it in a broad sense, it's like, wow, this is an extremely versatile service that can be applied in a whole load of different ways. Once you get out of that mindset of PPA mining, it opens all of these doors. And it did take us a while to figure that out, to be honest with you. But and it's taken us even longer to get to the point where we can execute it. But we'll get to the stage where we are now. We'll be going through our first proper funding round very shortly, actually. And when we need to do it fairly quickly, because we actually have several projects we could deploy now. So yes, it's starting to get a little bit busy over here.
Really cool. I like to see that. It's also great to see the progress of the companies that the guests of my podcast are involved. It's already yesterday. I was also talking with someone that returned on the podcast. It's just amazing to see all those projects and making that going forward. I will do that podcast the rest of my life. Probably the next 5-10 years on the Bitcoin topic will be amazing to see the documentation on not only the people, but also what the people are working on the projects. I already liked it in the first year.
Yeah, I mean, what an industry to be in, and what a time to be alive. I find it tremendously exciting because I like you. I love to see these breakthroughs. I particularly like it when someone comes up with something that I'd never even thought of, and someone's come up with this great application. I think runs on Bitcoin, and the best ones, of course, are the ones that as soon as they say it, you think, well, now that's really obvious. Why did no one think of doing this or doing that? And I love those ideas. And I suspect we probably haven't even seen the best ones yet. And that's the really cool thing about this. I think over the next 3-4 years, we will see things we haven't even imagined. And in fact, good analogy for you. I was heavily involved with the internet in the 90s as it was being developed. And my side was kind of talking to people about adoption and education in the UK of the internet, which was quite negative, funnily enough, at the time. And we were thinking, wow, one day you might be able to download a movie, which just seemed completely alien at the time. And nobody thought of things like Airbnb or Uber or all these completely crazy applications that you can do now. And I think we'll see the same with Bitcoin. So I think we're probably coming up to the download a movie stage, maybe, and we're going to see that generation of development and adoption that's going to lead to all sorts of things we don't even know about yet.
And that's why it's so exciting to talk about that, because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the category it falls in. Yeah. But I'm very keen to find out.
Absolutely, really cool. I'm also really fascinated currently with the topic of Bitcoin companies and the adoption on the institutional side. I don't know how much you dig into that. Obviously, we had the ETF last year. I think we also last time talked a little bit about the ETF, but more importantly, I actually talked yesterday had an in-person podcast actually in Austria with the oldest Bitcoin exchange in Austria, and he's the main guy when it comes to businesses buying Bitcoin, and I talked with him on the record and off the record a lot, and he had some crazy stories, and he said 80 or 90% of the companies he talks to, he has to sign an agreement to not talk about that they have Bitcoin. So he's like, there's an outstanding amount of companies in the German speaking area that we all know the names of that stack Bitcoin with like 5% or like 10% of the balance sheet. And they're like, it's like smaller family owned businesses sometimes, or like they have the fear that someone finds out or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the career risk thing that they're like still keeping away with, like, and they don't want to talk about it. It's very different, I think, in the American sense now of like, oh, like we have Bitcoin, see, we're a great company. So I was just wondering if you heard anything like that in the UK, if you hear about Bitcoin companies or like companies that are far away from Bitcoin but still experimenting with Bitcoin on the balance sheet and other things.
Only anecdotally, like you, I've got friends of friends who have dabbled a bit or just got a little bit, and they put on the balance sheet. I mean, one of my companies obviously operates with Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and you're right, it does fall into a couple of camps, because you've got, one extreme, you've got the sailors, a public company anyway, so they have to make everything known. But there are private companies as well who have kept it quiet. There are a few who've been vocal about it. There's some on Twitter who announce every now and again, I've bought another 0.5 Bitcoin for the company treasury. Generally smaller amounts because they're smaller companies. So we know it's happening. I don't know if we get really a true picture. I think at some stage it may become fashionable to talk about it, but I don't think we're at that stage yet. So I think a lot of people do keep it quiet. And I do think the number of companies that have it is higher than we think. It's still small, but I suspect it's higher than we think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very small number. He talked about maybe 1% of all companies currently of the research and studies that he has done in the German speaking area are interested or are currently thinking about that, like 1% of all companies. Those are tens of thousands of companies.
Of course.
But it's not that much.
I'll tell you what, we should get them along to Business Day at Prague. Those guys will be exactly the right audience for that. And those guys who are on the fence would really benefit from that. So let's tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be great. It's also one thing that he told me is like 2 years ago, he had to reach out to companies like, do you want to buy Bitcoin and stuff like that. Now he has so much to do that he just gets only the request that comes like, hey, we want to buy Bitcoin. So he sees a lot of interest there. So that will be, I think that career risk aspect of it will flip rather soon. I don't think like this year or like it depends on like which country and where you are. America maybe sooner than in the European region, but the career risk seems to flip slowly as it's getting normalized. Of like it's a career risk that you talk about Bitcoin, and maybe at some point it's a career risk not to have any knowledge about Bitcoin.
Yeah, and also don't forget, if we're talking about companies still. Again, an analogy you can take from the internet days. At the time it exploded, because remember, there was this negative idea. It seems crazy, but it really wasn't seen as a useful thing in the early days. But some people did go ahead, web designers, business consultants, process integrators. These guys went out and realized what was going on. And then were able to sell their services to companies, either their own companies or other companies, and pretty much set whatever hourly rate they wanted, because of course everyone suddenly realized, oh, we need the internet and we need to know how to use it and install it. And so it wasn't just technical people, it was all these process and marketing people as well. Had to come up with whole new strategies for the companies. So those people for quite a long period of time really became quite indispensable. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see the same thing with Bitcoin as this global open source network. I talk about being the go-to guy. I think, if you can become the go-to guy for your company, it may not happen today. You might have to have a bit of patience, but eventually companies are going to realize we need to either look at this from a treasury point of view, a payment point of view, something like that. I have no idea. But doesn't that Robin guy, he talked about Bitcoin, doesn't he know about it? Let's get him in. Let's get him to set up a task force, head up this division. I want this to happen yesterday. You're the guy. How much is it going to cost me? So, I think there's going to be an element of that because we've already seen it. So we're going to see it again. So listen, I would say to you, if you're in a company and you know a bit about Bitcoin, is educate yourself now and get ready, because I think that day will ultimately come.
That's a super interesting point of like, no matter what you do in a company, to position yourself as the Bitcoin guy could be very beneficial to your career in the next like 5 to 10 years.
I don't think there's any question of that. I mean, you've got the decision makers, the top we're talking about, the people who own the companies and the C-suite executives who talk this through, but someone's going to execute that strategy. And if you're the go-to guy, you're the one who's going to be able to say, yeah, I'll do it, but I want a 80% pay rise, please.
Really cool. All of a sudden you can charge consultants premiums within your own company.
It'll happen. I'm telling you.
That's amazing. I think, and it's super fun, like 435 episodes, and I never thought about that aspect of Bitcoin employees. One thing that we're already over the hour, but one thing that I want to touch on, because you brought it 2 times actually already up, the internet adoption and comparing that with the Bitcoin adoption. How comparable are they, and what kind of do you think will happen with the Bitcoin adoption, if it's comparable to what happened with the internet adoption?
Yeah, it's brilliant question. I do talk about this quite a lot. I mean, I love the analogy because, of course, they're both global open source networks that you can build on and aren't effectively controlled by anyone. So everyone's got this ability to access it and use it whenever they want to. One because of the other, of course. Adoption rates. It's fascinating because there's a lot of work done on what the adoption level is. It's very hard to say what that is for lots of reasons, mainly to do with number of wallets created and active movement on that. And a lot of the research houses do produce data from time to time saying what it is. Willy Woo, I think the Analyst, he produced a couple of tweets fairly recently, and I really trust that guy's judgment. He's very good at collating data and looking at it objectively. And I think the kind of the most optimistic viewpoint is we're around 4 to 5% global adoption. Now, there are people who disagree with that and think it's a bit lower. I think it's probably the optimistic end of where we are now. And then you look at that, you map that back to where we were on the internet, and you end up somewhere around, I think it's 96, 97. Don't quote me exactly on that, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around there. And if you compare the two S curves together, obviously you get nothing, and then you get a movement upwards. It looks visually very close to the Bitcoin level of adoption. So going forward in terms of forecasting, pretty much all of the forecasting houses, the research houses, do predict 1 billion users no later than 2030. Some of them predict it a lot sooner. I think the most optimistic is the end of this year, which I think is probably a little overambitious. But we can say, I think, safely that we're looking between now and the end of 2030 to 1 billion users, which would be, I think, pretty comparable to the internet. And that doesn't really surprise me. It's network effect, right? More people start using it, adopt it, the more value it has, so the more people start using it. It wasn't just the internet, it's phones, radio, everything has that same network effect. So I think I may have gone on a bit too long there, but hopefully I've answered your question.
No, it was brilliant. I liked that a lot. And just a small thing that I want to add on to is those 4 to 5% users. For me, it's always also a question of like how much and how convicted they are already in Bitcoin, and how many that they actually understand Bitcoin. Because for me, if you have, let's say your net worth is like $50,000, and you have $1,000 in Bitcoin, I'm not sure if you really understood what Bitcoin is.
I know, I totally agree with you. I mean, these numbers have all sorts of nuances, and you're absolutely right. When you're looking at research, there's a whole load of caveats. So you're absolutely correct in your statement. And because of the only way we can measure it, is some on-chain data. Really can do it with surveys, but they're notoriously unreliable. So we end up with this sort of number around that level, and there are a lot of caveats to it. So however, interestingly, over the years, we have seen that number increase. So even with all those caveats and the mess and the variables that are around it, we have seen an increase. I think the number we were quoting in 2016-17 was certainly less than 1%. So we have seen it go up, and we have seen it move faster. We don't know what the actual number is, but we have seen it move faster.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Of we can measure if the number stays consistent, and we are looking at the same consistent on-chain and survey data, and we track that same number. We can see the rate of change. We don't know exactly how accurate that number is, but at least we see how quickly it's going to be adopted. It would be really fun to see statistics of like all hardware wallets producers combined. How many hardware wallets did you sell? Like what is the rate? Do you know how many users there are? Like, I think that there are a lot of statistics that we just don't have that would be really fun to see. I know actually last year at Bitcoin Prague, I think Treasure talked about that only, was it 2%? I think 2%, he said, only 2% of Bitcoiners have a hardware wallet. I think
was that last year?
Yeah, I think last year was it,
Yeah.
because that was where I made the podcast with him and with Seyr, and this was, I'm 99% sure it was last year.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if we can get any update to those numbers, but that doesn't surprise me because in being in the Bitcoin space, we think all these cool things are happening left, right, and center. But the reality is, we are still at the beginning of this whole revolution. My kids grew up with the internet. Going back to that analogy, no one's really grown up with Bitcoin yet. It'll be some time before that's kind of a normal thing. We're not anywhere close to that. So things like self-custody, proper self-sovereignty are all included in that, but they're kind of aspirational. They're much further down the curve. We've got to shitcoin, play with exchanges, and do all that other stuff first before we get to that point. And part of what we do, particularly part of what you do, Robin, is trying to shorten that process a bit and hopefully avoid a lot of the mistakes that certainly I've made and others made in the very early days by not taking the time to understand it properly, which is no mean feat. It does take time.
I found it actually.
Okay.
But without hearing him talk, I'm not sure exactly what those 2%, but those 2% I remember. And I think he said that only 2% of Bitcoiners have hardware wallets, but I don't know what this 500 million, if he...
I think that's the 500 million is estimated users, because that's one of the numbers. That's 500 million. So that's one of the numbers that's been floated around as now. It's within that sort of same ballpark still. So you do see that one around as well.
Yeah, super interesting. But yeah, that number was super shocking for me. That's why it stayed in my head, because I made polls myself on my YouTube channel, but maybe I have a more self-custody audience, and there's usually like 40 to 50% of people that do self-custody versus not doing self-custody. But yeah, maybe some of the Bitcoin users, as mentioned, they just have $1,000 in Bitcoin, have it on some exchange, or maybe in an ETF or anything like that. They don't watch Bitcoin channels.
No, that's why your answers are probably skewed as well. I mean, you said 40 to 50%. I mean, well, these guys are Bitcoiners. They're following you because they're fascinated in what you're talking about and the developments going on, same as me. So they're going to have a much higher propensity to say yes, self-custody.
So to every second of my audience, please get a self-custody set up.
It is quite scary when you do it the first time. I don't know about you, but I was quite nervous about the whole thing. But actually, it's not that bad. And just take your time, do it a little bit first to work it out.
How long did it take you from first buying Bitcoin to first getting self-custody?
Years. I mean, it was 16, right? So, and it took me, I did I did all the classic mistakes. I think we talked about last time. Shit coins do things wrong, and yeah. So less said about that, the better, I think. But yeah, I took the long way round on that one as well. So it seems to be the way I do things. Get there in the end, though, get the right result. But I don't know why it takes some time for my brain to get all the factors together, I think.
It's super interesting. It took me a while to really understand Bitcoin. And I thought in the beginning that actually Bitcoin is a scam. And I wanted to prove my friend wrong. I told that story over and over in the podcast. But I actually got a ledger on day one. Like I just bought that because I was listening to the one Bitcoin guy, and he was just like, "Oh, you need a self-custody," I wasn't aware that you can keep your Bitcoin even on an exchange. So I thought you actually have to have a wallet in the beginning to keep your Bitcoin. I think that for me it was just a default that you have to have, and so I bought Bitcoin. I was still not sure if it's even something valuable, but I was like, okay, let's put $100 in Bitcoin. Let's buy that ledger wallet for like I don't know, $150 or what it was, and let's try that thing out of like from the bank to the exchange. I think back then I used Coinbase, then from Coinbase to Ledger, and from Ledger back to Coinbase, and from Coinbase back to my bank. I just wanted to figure that thing out. So actually, I'm very proud. It was not.
Well, I'm so impressed. I'm glad you're doing this job, Rob. That's all I can say.
No, it took me a long while to actually understand Bitcoin, even though I had it for a year. And I thought I needed 3 years to get over the thing that Bitcoin is a scam. So I could have bought 3 years earlier.
So you did like step 10 and then did steps 1 to 9 afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But hardware wallet was I got I probably just clicked on the right video, and the right guy was like, "Oh, you need a hardware wallet." And I was like, "Okay, maybe I cannot keep it longer than a year on an exchange or something like that." And it was just natural for me. But yeah, anyways, thank you so much for that. We have now a question. I think last time we didn't do it. It's a question that I brought into the podcast a little later. It's one that I give each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
We can learn from me beside Bitcoin. That it takes me a long time to get to the right conclusion ultimately. No.
You're still very early.
What can you learn from me? I don't know. Is there anything else I'm good at? I'm not sure there is. Mining and Bitcoin, pretty good at those. Do you know what? I don't know if that's a statement of my life at this point, that I actually have to really think about that. I think the only other thing I would say that I can do quite well is writing. So I've written a couple of books and thousands of articles. So that would probably be the area that I would go from. And we actually did do this question last time, but I can't remember what you asked me.
Yeah, we have already, like, we have an end routine where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest. Has been in, but I wasn't sure if I already did that question also last time. Really interesting. Now to the actual end routine, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And it's a super interesting one. It was with the, obviously yesterday guest. There are currently 35 strategic Bitcoin reserve bills active. It's quite a lot in the States. How many do you think will, at the end of the Trump administration, actually have a strategic Bitcoin reserve of the States?
Okay, well, that is an interesting question. So at the end of the Trump administration, so we're, 53 days in, aren't we? So that's quite a lot of time, 4 years. Dennis Porter is obviously, he's got a lot going on. A lot of the states have already, not a lot, but some states have already iced it. Some, for now anyway, they'll come back. I think we've got 3 looking pretty promising. I seem to remember, is it Utah, Florida, and Texas? Don't quote me on that. Who look like they may go over the line first. Oh yeah, that's it. What is it? Is that Arizona? Oh yeah, it looks like it.
It's I just discovered that website yesterday. It's actually a really good overview of where those bills are, and you can actually also see the original source and the bill directly also when you look to the details.
Yeah, that's useful. I think so. I got. Looks like I got Florida wrong. They're still in the early stages. But the question was how many? Right, 50 states. Not all will introduce. I'd say there's a good case for around half a dozen. So this is all the way through and actively buying. I know that doesn't seem many in 4 years from the amount of bills that are going on, but there's going to be a whole load of issues with this, and it's going to take some time to work it all out. So I'm going to go for 6. And that's really no more than a gut feel, maybe a slight educated guesstimate. But to be honest with you, I think at this stage it's anyone's guess.
Absolutely. And there has been already 6 bills that failed at this point. So it's already, just because there are now 30, 35 bills active doesn't mean that they all pass. They probably won't all pass. And maybe some have to be reintroduced and like things like that. And yeah, political system is more complicated than we think, and they can even if, because people say like, oh, like House and Senate is now Republican, but the states have also different House and Senates, and even if House and Senate is Republican, there can still be opposition within the Republican Party that says like, oh, we don't want that Bitcoin thing. It's not that just because Trump is now a Bitcoin. How much he's a Bitcoin we can discuss, but
let's not go crazy.
Yeah, go crazy with that. Yeah. That all Republicans are for Bitcoin now. That's not the case. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, please do, because I say that it's particularly with mining in the UK, it's very exciting at the moment, and it's something we love to talk about as much as possible. So look, Twitter is my main thing. I have been fairly quiet on Twitter recently, mainly because I've been so busy, but we'll get back to that. So that's Jason Deane. And of course, there's Renewer Blocks as well, which has got an odd spelling, but maybe we'll put the link in the notes to make it easier to find. Actually, we have a new website going live. I think it's next week. It's more or less a placeholder at the moment, so that will give more information on what's going on and some of the investment opportunities, and that's just renewerblocks.com. They're the best places to get hold of me. My DMs are open. My emails is out there as well, so I always reply. So don't be shy of dropping me a line. And Rob, if I don't see you before, I will see you in Prague.
It will be really, really great. Are you in Vegas also, or any other conferences?
No, I went a bit crazy a few years ago and travelled all over the place. So I've reined it in for a bit, but I am looking forward to Prague, and I think I'm going to do Cheat Code. Actually, I'm going to go to Cheat Code. I don't know if you're coming over for that one, are you?
And no, I think not.
That's Peter McCormack's event.
That's very recently, right? That's quite soon, actually.
It is quite soon. Yeah, it's only a few weeks' time. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, yeah, I mean, that one's local for me, relatively. So I'll be going to that. And I think that's it in Prague this year. So, as I say, I will see you there.
The best one you do. I'm glad. Really cool. Thank you so much, Jason, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.